Well, hello, everyone. We're so glad to have you here today. The webinar is called What We Have Learned About Twice-Exceptionality in the Digital Age, Strategies for Helping Our Students Tap into Strengths Using Innovative Technology. I'm Jennifer Courduff. I am a professor at Azusa Pacific University here in sunny Southern California. And my partner in crime is going to introduce herself now.
Hi, I'm Sarah Orton. I'm a former elementary school teacher and now work with educators as a professional developer.
So this is how we roll, everybody. If you have questions, both Sarah and I will be looking at the questions in the chat, and we like this to be really interactive. So don't hold your questions till we say, are there any questions? Just put them on in there, and we'll be reading them out loud to everyone and answering them as we go. Okay? So let's first go back and talk a little bit about twice-exceptionality. So twice-exceptional students have an area of true giftedness. It can be evidenced in math giftedness, or in creative writing, or in music and the arts. These students are passionate, they love to learn, they're out-of-the-box thinkers, they explore, they invent, and they investigate. But what's interesting about giftedness is when you have an area of giftedness, more than likely you're also going to have an area of deficit or disability. Conversely, if you have an area of deficit, a cognitive disability, a behavior challenge, a physical challenge, there is always, or most always, going to be an area of giftedness as well. So we want to look at it through both lenses today, because both lenses need to get some real digging in. When you have the disability, you've got to dig deep for that area of giftedness. And when you have an area of giftedness, you really got to pay attention to the student to make sure that you are supporting their area of deficit. Some of those are evidenced as ADHD, or dyslexia, or a sensory disorder, or they could be on the autism spectrum, or they show evidence of depression and anxiety. So Sarah, do you want to talk about some common misconceptions?
Yes, so there's many misconceptions when it comes to 2E students. One of them is that they could be gifted in the arts rather than academics, meaning that a lot of individuals think that if they're not gifted academically, then they're not gifted at all, which is not true. They could have a gift in art, in music, and lots of other things besides just math, reading, social studies, science, and so on. Another common misconception is that those who have learning challenges don't have any natural strengths. They don't have anything that they are good at, which is not true. Another big one, those who are gifted have no learning challenges. They're just lazy. And this is also another huge misconception, because a lot of times gifted students especially are bored and need to be challenged, and their laziness is just a sign that they need something more to do. Understood.org is a great website that shows 7 of the big misconceptions that are out there.
So I'm going to share my screen real quick so that you can see understood.org right here. There's 7 great myths about twice-exceptional students. You think being gifted makes up for having a learning or attention issue, which is not true at all. They can't be gifted and lack basic skills, which is really untrue as well, because with that area of giftedness, sometimes those basic skills don't make it. Sometimes they flash out as creative writing, or a real strength in dance or in music, and those things aren't evidenced when you are looking at the basic skills and thinking, they can't be gifted and be struggling. 2E students aren't eligible for IEPs or 504s. Not true. They certainly are eligible for both once you put them through this student studies team process. Giftedness and challenges can't be addressed at the same time. Yes, you can really support the learning challenge by leveraging that area of giftedness as a support to get them up to speed where they're challenged. Addressing weaknesses should be on the top priority. Well, no. It should be on the top priority, as well as addressing the strengths. Because again, you can support learning of the weaknesses through those areas of strength. 2E students need accommodations, so they can't be in AP classes. Again, not true. They can be in advanced placement class and need that support with a disability. And students should be more mature than other kids their age. Again, no. Sometimes they lack the maturity they need, and you need to support them with that. So the link to this website is at the end of our presentation on the last slide, so you can have it to share with colleagues and friends. I'd like to show you a video that discusses uniqueness from the student's perspective. Here we go.
How does your brain work?
Well, I think of my brain as a living organism in my head. I know some animals have it in their stomachs or legs. That's pretty freaky for us, but I like to think of it metaphorically and psychologically as this sort of thought train and an oil drill, but it's sort of drilling out facts and information. It's like a whole world.
My brain runs at a gazillion miles an hour, thinking of every possible way that something can work and every possible way that something can go horribly wrong.
I've always kind of been curious as to why the brain does what it does, why I get stressed a lot, why does this happen? Does this happen a lot to normal people? Does this happen to people with Asperger's or who are on the autism spectrum?
What do you mean by that? Like literally the electrical synapses that happens as different cells connect to each other and create memories that are accessed by different neurons?
I'm not quite sure how my brain works, so to speak. I just realized from a very early age that it worked quite differently from other people's. It was, among other things, I noticed more literally minded than most. It took a while for my brain to wrap itself around the idea of metaphor and symbolism.
My brain works really verbally. I'm able to code and do complex math and programming. However, I'm lacking in doing math like Algebra 2 type mathematics because the way I learn is to associate things with words. And when you're coding, it's more like we're having a conversation. I'm having a conversation with a computer, more like I'm having a conversation with you right now.
I like to learn by talking with people, but not always, because I don't always like talking to people.
I feel that the things I'm interested in, I can focus on it and get it done. But with things that I'm not interested in, like as I was saying earlier, like in humanities with history, or reading books that I don't exactly find interesting, I cannot focus. Subconsciously, my brain is telling me, you need to get good grades, you need to do this, and I feel like I have to do it, but at the same time, I'm thinking this is boring as hell. I don't want to do this. This is awful. This book is awful. Why do we even care about history?
As a little kid, I used to spend hours and hours and hours and hours looking on Wikipedia pages. Ooh, this and this and this, and you would read through stuff and memorize stuff. And for me, it was almost like, because you would try and analyze stuff and draw connections between things, and that's what it's always been about. And ideas pop in my mind, and it's always trying to figure out stuff, and that's the problems that my mind is best at, when it's trying to draw connections and draw lines between things. And that really, more than anything else, is I think how my brain thinks, is it's constantly thinking this and this, and it's like, we got that.
I want to be that guy who sees everything from all perspectives so I can just understand everything. So a magnet, I guess, maybe. A magnet and a blender, because the magnet pulls, whatever I can use and things that help strengthen me. And it goes in a blender, and then out comes my perspective on the whole thing.
My brain is particularly good at figuring out whether you're an okay person to be around or not.
Sometimes the greatest thoughts come from the wandering thoughts.
All right, so magnet and a blender. I think that's an extraordinary way to understand the twice-exceptional brain. What questions do you have at this point? So we're going to ask you a couple questions. Actually, do you think all teachers at your site know how to identify 2E kids?
Feel free to chime in using the chat. Some things that at my former school site, a lot of the teachers and administrators didn't know how to identify twice exceptional kids. So we needed to become advocates. So if you are a gifted teacher or a special education teacher or even just a general ed teacher or a parent, it's your job to be an advocate for those kids at your site. You don't have to be knowledgeable in just students with disabilities or gifted or all of it for that matter. My niche was gifted students, and I twice a year went in for staff meetings and I gave information on what it was to be a gifted student.
And didn't you start out with thinking it was just you were going to get gifted students, Sarah, and then as soon as you got into that, that's part of your story, right? As soon as you got into that, you just, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it. So I thought that I was going to have, a class of gifted, all gifted students. And I see someone, Lisa on here said, the thought is often, how could a gifted student need any added services because they're quote unquote gifted, which is true. My class was full of gifted students, but my very first year, I had a twice exceptional student. I had no idea what that was. Student who had ADHD, and that for me was hard because there was nobody advocating for him. He was gifted, he was in my class, he was supposed to be just fine. So I started educating the teachers, the administrators on what it was like to be a gifted student, how to identify those gifted students, and what was giftedness. And I worked with special educators so that they could help teachers identify students who had special needs and show that those go hand in hand. A lot of gifted students have writing disability and writing where they couldn't vocalize themselves, or their grades were plummeting because they had another disability, and they would just see it as, oh, they're lazy, which was a misconception. So it's just really important for you to become an advocate and just to find your niche and be there for those kids.
Thanks, Lisa Rock, for saying she hasn't heard anyone refer to students as 2E. We really appreciate that because it's a very little known population. And when you start opening your eyes to looking at your gifted students and to looking at your students with disabilities, you have to remember that rule, that nature provides balance. So if you have an area of extreme giftedness, you're going to have an area of deficit. And if you're going to have an area of deficit, there is an area of giftedness. You just need to look for it. So it's important. So how do we help these students, our 2E students, to be self-directed learners? Because oftentimes they're frustrated in certain learning areas and they don't want to do it. They just dig their heels in. I've had many students over 23 years in the classroom that have been that way. So the way that we have to start helping them is we need to help them communicate. We need to help them learn through their strengths. And we really need to help them with being in the world. And by that I mean a lot of times these students don't really fit in, or they feel like they don't fit in. So we're going to talk about some really innovative resources now to help buffer up that communication, that learning, and that sense of being in the world, and where do I fit in. So I'm going to tell you a story. When one of the years that I taught fourth grade, I had a little girl, real little girl named Shaylee. And I just adored Shaylee, but she had a writing deficit. And so she was in RSP 2 or 3 days a week to work on her writing because she wrote a string of letters, no periods, no punctuation, no margins, just letters, letters, letters. And that's the way she wrote. 2 months or so into the school year, we were having a free write exercise, and I kneeled down by her desk, and I looked at those letters a little bit more carefully. And if I took the time to really see that there was a story there, I just had to use my sense of phonics to figure out what the story was in the language of Shaylee. And so as I started looking at that, I'm like, Shaylee, this is a really extraordinary story. Can you tell me more about it? And she says, well, Mrs. Courduff, it's this, and there's like unicorns, and they're jumping around. She had this whole universe in her head. And so what we started to do with Shaylee, I worked with the RSP teacher to let her tell her story through a digital recording device, and then use that digital recording device as a dictation device. And then the RSP teacher and I both, we worked together with her to help Shaylee better up her writing skills, her punctuation, her sentence structure. But we did that through her storytelling, and that was her area of strength. So I know that we've gone over this in several resources, webinars now, but I want to remind all of you, if you haven't, a great tool for communicating with writing challenges is Read and Write for Google Chrome. So I'll quickly go over that with you. Let's see that. So I have up here Idols of the King, just because I was sharing it with a friend earlier. But you see the toolbar, this little purple one right here, Read and Write. If I press it, it will go away and it will come back. Read and Write for Google Chrome is free for teachers, so be sure to use your school email address when you sign up, because you'll have access to all these beautiful tools for free. And it's very low cost for schools. There's word prediction, there's read aloud, there's a picture dictionary, there's a regular dictionary. It will read, text to speech, it will read the web page for you. It will read a selection of the web page for you or a screenshot for you. And what I love the most about it is these highlighting tools. Let me go there first. You can have students literally highlight different parts of the page with different numbers. So highlight all the nouns in yellow, highlight all the verbs in green, highlight all the prepositions in blue, and then when you click the little round button, it will collect the highlights and it will create a new Google Word document that will grab all the yellow words into one section, all the green words into another section, all the blue words into another section, to really help those students learn how to manage text. Another thing that I love is this tool right here that simplifies. So if you have a student who has brilliant stories like Shaylee but really has a hard time with reading, you can simplify the web page down a couple levels so that they are able to read at a more simplified level, which is really a universal design for learning strategy, and it's really useful for these students. I'm going to stop for questions at this time, and then we're going to keep moving.
I wanted to chime in. Oh, yes, that's what I was going to chime in on. We have a comment that says, I work at a blind school. I feel like at my school we recognize that our students are special for overcoming their deficits. But if they don't pass the gifted test, we generally don't recognize official giftedness. At my former school site, I actually was a part of the gifted, I don't want to say grading, but I was the one that went in and scored. That's what it was. I scored the gifted test. And at first glance, they're very, they're really, it's to each their own when you look at it. People would say, oh, nope, they failed because they only got 4 out of the 10, so they are not gifted. But the gifted coordinator at our school site would say, but look at the way they connected on their drawings, and would say that this student is most likely gifted in art. That's where things would get a little hairy, because we would say, well, we put kids in classes for reading, and if they're gifted in reading, then they're in social studies, and if they're gifted in math, then they are automatically gifted for science, but we did look at those artistic abilities because that would show an area of giftedness, and it normally meant that we could take that art gifted, that higher level thinking in art and apply it to writing, and that's not always true, but I think that's where you need to become an advocate and say that this student might not academically be gifted, but they can read music and they can play and they can compose or whatever it is, and they need to be challenged. So that's where you really need to find a way to become advocates for those students, because not every gifted student will pass the gifted test, especially, good thing my dad is not on here, but my dad would purposely fail tests and he was gifted. And that's what I think gifted students do sometimes too when they're bored with it. So I do think that it is important for you to become an advocate and judge those students individually, not based on a test, which is what we seem to do a lot of times.
Right, because a lot of times the tests don't really show the giftedness. And then students who are truly gifted or advanced far enough that they should be in a gifted program, just because they are not good test takers doesn't mean that they're not gifted. It means that they're not good test takers. And again,
so we encourage you to be an advocate.
Yes. Those areas of giftedness are buried underneath bad spelling, or somebody, I remember a young student named Brian who sat like perched on his chair like a bird all day long every day because he just had a lot of energy. And I needed to figure out what made Brian tick and then use those strength areas to buffer up his areas of complete and utter boredom, which is they're not going to get anywhere. Any other questions before we move forward? Okay.
All right, so we're going to, I'm sorry. Yes, thick and thin questions. Okay, so this is a learning tool that I use, more of a metacognitive tool that I will go over some technological tools that you can use for thick and thin questions. But thick and thin questions are a great tool to use with all kids. Thin questions are ones that can be found in the book. That's why they're thin. They're easy. Who, when, where, how many. I started out using this in my classroom when I was reading a book called Holes. And questions would be like, where is Stanley currently? Or why? Well, maybe not so much as why, but when did Stanley go to Camp Green Lake? They were answers that could be found right then and there. Good basic level comprehension questions. Make sure your students are understanding what you're reading. Thick questions, you have to search to find the answers. You must provide evidence. So what do you think? What if? Why did? How did? What do you think? And how would you feel if? So these are more of your higher level thinking questions. They are also could be called Google proof questions. I always told my students that they did not have a right or wrong answer. I used this as an opportunity for my students to journal, which are the tools I'm going to give you next. But I would tell them there is no right, there is no wrong answer. You just have to provide evidence, which is actually a very hard skill for your students that are twice exceptional, your gifted students. They want to be right all the time. So if you ask them, if anybody knows or has read the book Holes, do you think Stanley should have gone to Camp Green Lake for his punishment? The book doesn't say if he should have gone to Camp Green Lake or not. The author decided that's where he was going. So the students have to dig into the text, use evidence to say, I think or I don't think. And this is great for your students who think that they have to always be right. They have to get the A. They have to have the right answer, because there isn't one. And these are the types of questions you want to be asking your twice exceptional students, because it gives them the opportunity to come out. Oh, go ahead.
No, I want to warn you too, because they'll be frustrated with you when you say there's no right or wrong answer. What do you think? What is the evidence behind your opinion? And they're just going to be like, I hate you right now because I want to be right. So be prepared for that, because they.
But it's great.
Find that to be true there. Yeah, they get real frustrated.
Yes.
But I'm like, there it is. You've got to figure it out. You've got to support it with evidence.
There's all different types of question stems that you can use. These are just some of the basic ones that I have used and I have felt that were effective. I do think it's important to still ask your thin questions to make sure that they were reading the book, but the thick ones are a good way to ask challenging thinking questions. So now we're going to go over some of the technology tools, and these can be used with the thick and thin questions and really can be used with anything in the classroom, at home. One of the first tools is called Weebly, and I'm going to actually share my screen to go over these tools: Weebly, FreshGrade, Seesaw, and Google Sites. And a lot of these might sound very new to a lot of you. They were new when I was teaching. Well, maybe not new, but new to me. So here we go. Okay, so this is Weebly. It's free. This is the Weebly for Education site. This is a site that I made for my classroom when I did Genius Hour. It's a great place to blog. So when you're doing those thick questions and you send them away, we did a Socratic seminar where they sat in a circle and we went over our thinking. But you want them to have evidence of that thinking. You want it written down somewhere, and paper and pencil isn't the best for all kids. Sometimes they might need to type it or take a video. Weebly is a free website that they can build, or you can build, and you can have them learn to blog, which is a good real life skill. This was mine. I have lots of just different pages on here. There's buttons, easy for maybe your older elementary, middle school, high school students to learn to do. I had in my 5th graders learned how to make their own, and I could add up to 10 student accounts on my personal account. So that made me feel good because, and I don't remember, it's been a while, but I can add members. I think you can add groups. It's private, nobody sees it. And I liked that my student accounts were right there. I can see them. I can click on them. I can see what they're working on before it gets published. Mine is published for anyone to see, but theirs wouldn't be. Theirs would be private, so I wasn't breaking any rules with their name. So this one's a little bit more advanced. I'm going to go over some other ones. The next one is sort of similar to, let me move this toolbar, is Google Sites. If your students have a Gmail, not a Gmail, but a Google account through school, this is free. I typed in Google Sites, and you can create a website. A couple of my students chose to make Google sites instead of Weebly to post for their blog. They felt that it was easier. Some felt that it was harder. So right here, new to Google Sites, it'll kind of go through how to set it up to create your first site. Free, like I said, great resource. Another a paid resource that was not on here, but another blog that a lot of teachers like is called Kid Blog. So if you're interested in a kid-friendly platform, it is a subscription service, but that is another one that I've known people to use. My next one is FreshGrade, which is on here. Nope, here it is, FreshGrade. And this is a kind of like an online portfolio. So you can use this to journal, also free. When you type in FreshGrade, you choose I'm a teacher or I'm a student. You can add all of your students. Here is my fictitious Anthony in 5th grade. I can grade right from here. I can export. I can add activities for them to see, and when they go into their student site, it's all private. It's another great resource, especially now since parents come to open house, or if you are a parent, it's hard to see your students' work when it's all digital. This digital portfolio is great. You can have them create a website right on here, and it's easy for all students to use. My last one that we're going to go a little bit more into depth is Seesaw. And Seesaw is another student portfolio. online, it's digital. You can share with parents. There's a family communication. Here's mine. You can create videos. You can do activities. And this is good for all of your students. It's differentiating all wrapped up into one pretty little platform. This is probably the most kid-friendly platform. Even kindergartners can use it. So I wanted to show you a little bit more about Seesaw. They already have some free activities in the Seesaw library. You don't even have to create. So, for example, this is what it would look like. So if you're the teacher, you created this activity, or you're using, you want them to do this Reflection Wisdom Wednesday template. So you're going to add it, this would be their instructions. When they log in, they would tap add to open the template, they would write their answers, and they would submit, and you can read them right then and there, and you can approve them. So they would see right here, it says student will edit this template. This is the template they're going to see. And all of their tools are going to be right there for them. Right here, it shows you how to use the Seesaw activities. You click the heart button, then I share with my students, they respond, and then you get to approve. So what's cool is, let's say you have a student who writing is not their strength, and it's easier for them to video that thick question, their response. They can actually video themselves. They can add captions. They can draw on the video, or on, if they are using a brainstorming thinking map like this, and then submit it to you. And it all looks a little daunting, but it is very easy. Here is where you would add students, and it walks you through the entire process. This is in the way. So if they don't have a Google account, then they actually would just use an iPad or a device and scan a code, and it would bring them right up into the Seesaw. If they have a Google device, or if you have shared Chromebooks, like what we had in our classroom, once they were logged into the Chromebook, they could get it into their own Seesaw. If not, they just scan a QR code, and it brings them up, and they just choose their portfolio. And it's very easy. Something that I want to touch on too is, when you're doing something new, let's say that you're interested in Seesaw, you're interested in being able to have your students use this platform, give them 15 minutes to play with it. You would never hand a kindergartner a whiteboard and a marker, right? And then expect them to do what you want them to do. You need to give them 5 minutes to draw, or even 1 minute. That's what we did when I taught kindergarten. They need to get the drawing, coloring out of their system. Do the same thing with technology. Give them 15 minutes to play around with it, even the kindergartners, and you'll be surprised at what they'll learn before you even learn it. My other piece of advice is to don't become expert in Weebly and Seesaw and Google Sites. Become an expert in one. I was an expert in Weebly, and I gave my students lots of different options, and they would pick what they felt was best for them. They would play on it for 15 minutes, and I did not see that as playing, because they learned and they were able to ask questions, and somebody else became an expert. So become an expert facilitator. So is there anything that you wanted to chime in on, Jennifer, about Seesaw or any of these technology tools?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to let you go through them all first, because they're awesome tools. But the one thing that is the biggest hang up for teachers is they feel like they have to master the sites before their students get on the site. And that's not correct, because the students, they've grown up with the technology. They have a natural sense of curiosity, and they're not afraid to click around. They're not afraid to break things. They're not afraid to try things out. So in my classroom, I was the facilitator of the content. I'm the content expert, which is what I would say to my kids. If you need help, I had students, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, 6th, 7th, 8th grade students that were assigned to be the technicians of the class. They could troubleshoot with the sites. They knew everything about how to troubleshoot for the other students in the class. But if you have a content question, you come to me. But if you have a technical question, you go to the technicians. And those students really take ownership of that. They like that, especially those 2E students who need to be kept extraordinarily busy. But if you just tell them, here's what you need to do, here's the content, here's the site, give them, like Sarah said, 5, 10, 15 minutes to play around, to click around, to figure it out. You'll actually learn things from them about the site. I can't say it enough. I mean, when I used word clouds with my students, and still do, but they found all of these really cool, crazy ways to make their word clouds even better that I never would have found because, first of all, I don't have that click around because something great will come out of me clicking around. I don't have that in me. But the students do. They're fearless. And then let them teach each other. So really, again, you're the content expert. You don't have to be the Weebly expert or the Fresh Grade expert or the Seesaw expert or the Google Sites expert. You just need to provide a really solid idea of content.
And I knew I forgot something. I was looking for the button. I want to share my screen one more time. And I wanted to show you some of the controls really quickly so that you don't feel like this is super daunting. Here is where you would add students and families. Up here, this little toolbar button, this is the class settings. So, whoops, I just went, there we go. Can you still see my screen? No. Okay.
No, you have to share again. It's okay.
Okay, here we go. So my class name was presentation, just because I have student names on my other ones. But down here, you can choose your theme. You can manage, you can add another teacher, change your grade level. Student sign-in mode. So if you have, I chose email Google just because my students could log in, and my school was a Google site, so they were required to know, even kindergartners, how to sign in. If you have one-to-one devices, students can sign in using the student code. So this is where there's a place they could just scan the QR code and it automatically goes. Same with this one. It's the class code. I'm sorry, that's the class code. The student code, they would have their own unique code and they would choose their name. I think the email Google is honestly one of the easiest, or the class code, and they would choose their name to add. Then here, this big green button that was right in front of my face is where you would add, I can browse an activity, I can create an activity, I can post to a student journal, or I can send an announcement out, like don't forget your homework tomorrow. This is where you would click add an activity. You can browse the library, as I showed you, or create a new activity. So first you would name your activity. So if I was doing 6-question response to holes, and then I would type in my student instruction. So whatever my fit question might be, I could post it right here for them to see. Something else that I really like is you can add voice instructions. So this is great for your younger students, and when you need students who have an accommodation. Your twice-exceptional students might have a reading accommodation, or some sort of text-to-speech accommodation. You can add your voice instruction. You can also add multimedia instructions or examples. So here is, if your students have an accommodation for some sort of picture chart or pictures, right here you can add those as well, which is why I said that Seesaw is one of the best kid-friendly platforms, just because it encompasses everything. You can also include a template for student responses. So these are some of the buttons that they will see. They will be able to create a video. You might say in the instructions, write a response or create a video. They can draw, and then you can add notes, links, files. So I might create a video of me giving instructions just because I don't want to type it out, or it's easier, and I can include a drawing. So these are all things that you can add before you save it and push it out to the students to see. The students getting to know the platform is probably one of the easier things. I think what will take the most amount of time on the first day is getting everybody set up. But once they're in, it's well worth your time. Take the time a little bit each day and add a few students. That is what I did. I added a few at a time when this was very new to me. And once they were in, I gave them some time to mess around with it. They learned how to create journals. And I posted some of these other activities that you can see in the Seesaw library just for them to learn with. I don't think there's any harm with that, especially since you want them to become experts in using this platform. But this is one I highly encourage you looking into as a great way to meet the needs of all the students in your classroom. And some of your students who have some of those special accommodations, I think this platform will meet all of those. Go ahead and exit my share screen.
All right, are there any questions right now before we move on to Google Sites and then some more innovative tools? We've got about 19 minutes. No, you guys are wonderful. Sarah, do you want to share Google Sites real quick, or do you want to just talk about it?
I did. I shared Google. No, I shared Google Sites. Yeah, I don't have a Google site to show. I shared my screen. Just looks a lot like Weebly. It's Weebly's counterpart.
And it's just, I don't know that it's as easy as Weebly. I think Weebly is easier, personally.
It's funny. I had some fifth graders who said Google Sites was easier. I think it's in your brain, whatever one your brain is more wired for.
Yeah. Hour of Code.
Okay, so some creative outlets. We're going to give you some suggestions just for some educational, creative outlets for your Twice Exceptional students. Hour of Code has become very popular in schools across the nation. And the idea behind it is that students are dabbling in the world of science. I'm going to share my screen one more time to show you Hour of Code and what that looks like. Okay, here it is. So it's free. Students can just go on here. What will you create? 1 hour tutorials in over 45 languages. So it's basically teaching students a way to code. I had lots of students interested in learning how to create video games when I was doing projects for our Genius Hour, and they learned through Hour of Code how to code. And this is just a great activity in your classroom to have as well. Like Jennifer was saying, just creative outlets. So if you are a teacher or a parent at home and you are not sure how to use it, right here under How To goes through, gives you an actual little tutorial for you as the educator on how to use Hour of Code within your classroom. There's a video. They have little tutorials, student-guided tutorials, and then how to start off your coding. They have lots of cool activities in here for Hour of Code that are basics to get you started. So if you're, grades 2 through 5, you want to learn how to Minecraft, right here it goes through how it's the basics for coding. Beginner, comfortable, lots of switches. This allows the students to kind of pick what level they're interested in, their topics. So if you're like me and you're tying everything to reading because you're a reading teacher, I could click language arts, and right here there's a code for we can create a story together. So it doesn't just have to be, to them it might look as a fun activity, but you are aligning it with your curriculum, with your standards in the classroom, and giving them some sort of creative outlet that is not just sitting and doing something with pencil and paper or reading a book. It's kind of diving a little bit deeper into their skill set. Hour of Code is your basic learning to code. Minecraft, I'm sure everybody is rolling their eyes at Minecraft, but this honestly was a lifesaver for me. My first year teaching gifted students in 5th grade. I had taught 2nd and 3rd grade and loved them, and 5th graders were a whole new level of human being. And I taught a pre-Civil War project, I taught the Civil War, and we were learning about the pre-Civil War, the reasons the Civil War came about. And I created a menu, and one of the options was that they could code on Minecraft to create a pre-Civil War map. And it was actually very challenging for my students. It weaned out the kids who played Minecraft and the ones who really played Minecraft, who were diving deep into the world of Minecraft. And so I let them. They were essentially playing a game in my classroom, but they were building a map, and so they were connecting their learning. And it was interesting to see the ones that...
Didn't they get really obsessed about it too, Sarah? Didn't
Oh,
you
yeah.
tell me that?
I had kids go home. I had kids go home, and they would log into each other's Xboxes or however that works, and would be building the maps together because they were so obsessed with trying to get it finished, not just finished, just the creativity behind it. And some of their maps were, I mean, out of this world. Some of them were basic, but they weren't as good of coders. Scratch and FlowLab are also good creative outlets. Scratch is from MIT. It's a little bit harder than your hour of code where you're learning to code. It's more for your kids who are like Minecraft level. And FlowLab is more of like it's almost like, it's not, I don't want to call it a video game, but when I had students learning to create video games, some of them chose FlowLab because it was basic controls and it was just a lot easier for them. So these are just some ideas for coding. I don't know anything about coding, and kids, they watch YouTube videos on how to code, so just let them try it. Another one.
Is you can learn, and please don't be afraid of it, because you can learn anything in Google and on YouTube. Anything. Seriously. Okay. Did you want to talk about iMovie trailers? Or you still working on that?
I can't. Why don't you talk about iMovie trailers?
Yeah, iMovie. iMovie is kind of daunting on a laptop because I have so many choices that it's daunting for me. I'll start there because some of you are probably saying, no, I don't find it daunting. It's fine. I just love all of the templates and the choices, so that it just takes me away from the content that I'm trying to work on. So the iMovie trailers, and I'm going to share my screen and show you in YouTube and on Google. So I just did a Google search. I wrote iMovie tutorial in Google, and there's all these YouTube videos on how to do an iMovie trailer. There's a PDF, and then there's videos. So whatever your learning style is or the learning style of your kids, they can learn pretty easily. What I love about iMovie trailers is that they're limited to about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes. And I want to know that my students really, really understand the content. If it takes you 10, 12, 15 minutes to explain something, you really don't know it very well yet. But if you can explain something in 2 minutes in a power talk, then you deeply understand it and you synthesize the information. That's why I love iMovie trailers. Plus, then you're not boring everybody else with somebody's very lengthy explanation. So it locks you into under 2 minutes or so. And they're beautiful templates, and the kids just really love them. But one of the things that is a rule for me in my classroom is that whatever you put on that iMovie trailer, the background, the font, the transitions, the pictures, every single thing has to relate directly to the content, or you can't have it on there. And that's really important because the kids will have flaming dragons, and then the question becomes, okay, so tell me please, how does flaming dragon has anything to do with a polygon or with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? Because I don't remember seeing any flaming dragons in that book. And if they can say, well, Ms. Courduff, and logically connect those dots, I'll let them have it. But it's a higher level thinking strategy to make sure that all that content aligns, whether you're doing coding, whether you're doing Minecraft, whether you're doing an iMovie trailer, it all has to relate back. I'm going to stop sharing that. Okay. And then one more resource is Connected Ed. And I did just now put a link to Connected Ed lesson plans into the chat because there are many Connected Ed. There's Connected Ed for Pilates and Connected Ed for wellness, and there's tons of them. But the link that's there is one-stop shop lesson plans for using the Xbox Connect with your students. I've seen it in schools where they use it as a lunchtime activity on a rainy day. I've seen teachers bring their own Xbox Connect into the classroom, especially in math instruction. There's just a huge amount of lesson plans for math instruction where the kids can get up there and physically learn how to do the math. Again, remember, you do not have to know how to do everything. You just have to be the content expert.
So the last tool, yes, the last tool we want to talk about is called Kahoot. This is a good tool, engagement and self-directed learning. So Kahoot, you can create fun learning games. It's multiple choice. I'm going to show you a Kahoot in just a minute. You can introduce and reinforce new concepts, which was highly engaging. Students can create their own Kahoot. One thing that we did in my classroom was we talked about the right answer versus the best answer. And I know you're thinking that's the exact same thing, and it's not, especially if you are a teacher in an upper third grade and up doing state testing. You know that when they're taking a state test, that they can always eliminate down to 2, and we call those the right answer and the best answer. And I did that because my students would say, well, that's it. And then I would say, but is that really like the best choice that's in there? And because your gifted students can justify the wrong answers. Let's be real. They can justify any one of those answers. But we talked about which one was right and which one was best. And so letting them create their own promotes higher level thinking and doesn't allow them to choose 3 dummy answers and 1 right answer. You really want them to choose one that's not going to trick their classmates, but really make them think. Because especially when you get those double negatives in a test where they say not and not, or do not and not twice, it's very confusing, and you want them to be good readers. There's also lots of pre-made quizzes. I will quickly share my screen to show you Kahoot. I know a common misconception, among teachers, they don't like Kahoot because the students will sit there, and when they go to click the right answer and they click play, there's A, B, C, D, which are shown as like a blue triangle and a red square, something like that. And they know it's right there. It's always in the same position. So they'll be sitting there tapping the screen, typing on red, 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 so that they can win the game. But you can actually, in the settings, you can change it so that within the question, here's a red triangle, a blue diamond. The red triangle won't always be first. You can switch the answers around, so they have to wait for the screen to pop up to choose their answer. And like I said, this is really fun for students to create their own, especially when you're using this as an end of unit. It's engaging. They can work with a partner, shows collaboration. And maybe you give them sentence stems, ask those thicker, maybe not thick questions that have all right answers, but really promote higher level thinking that aren't directly from the book, ones that they have to find a good answer and provide better evidence for. Kahoot is fun. We used it a lot in Texas, STAR review, as a time to get away from just the paper and pencil of everything. But I also encouraged my students to create their own as review, just because if they're thinking about their thinking, metacognitive skill, they're going to do much better. Kahoot's really, really, really easy to use. All you do is click create, and it is right there. A quiz, a jumble, or a survey. You can create new. The title, you need a description. You can make it visible just for you and the kids, or you can put it public. There's lots of public quizzes, and then you can go ahead and get started. Very, very easy. It's like an online test, but in a game format. And again, just like Seesaw, there's lots of other free already Kahoots. If they're creating their own, they can come in here and play with them. Or if you're just trying to try it out in your classroom or at home, right here are lots of templates to get you started.
And don't forget that Kahoot can be used as a reciprocal teaching tool. So if you're having your students make their own Kahoot, they really have to think about the content. And when you teach something, as we all know as the teachers, as you teach something, you learn it more deeply. So Kahoot used that way as a reciprocal teaching tool can be very powerful and engaging for students whose brains are racing and are thinking about 1,700 things at once, and they need to blend that and get it out of their heads. So as you saw in the video at the beginning. So there's articles and there's resources on this final slide. We've got about 4 minutes. Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to put our emails and contact information up so that you can jot that down in our final minute. Questions, comments, thoughts? Big word of the
Also,
day.
all of these resources can be used with students of all abilities. Don't misconceptualize kids by saying they can't. They can. And I can tell you, because if my 1-year-old daughter can figure out how to open my phone, then any student can figure out how to use Kahoot all by themselves. I mean, they've been born into a technological age.
Have you used Franklin spellers, Sarah? Marcy is asking.
No. I've never actually heard of Franklin spellers.
Yeah, but I can do some research, Marcy, and if you want to reach out to us on email, we can collaborate on that. Pauline has asked, can you show the resource list slide again, please? Yes, there you go. And there's more than just that. I've got a massive Google document that I've created, and we regularly add resources too. So if you're interested in that, just send us an email, and I'll send you. Just say, hey, Jennifer, massive Google Doc, and I'll send you a link to that. That's easy. Lisa asks, what if you know a young adult who made it through school age and college unidentified as being 2E, but shows all the indicators of 2E? What workplace recommendations do you have? Well, first of all, Lisa, I say put them in an area where they will flourish. Help them, listen to them, and help them articulate areas that are challenging for them, and then areas where they know they'll flourish, and then try to put them in areas where they will flourish. You don't want to put a young adult in a challenging circumstance because you want them to feel really, really successful first, and then start scaffolding in the areas where they're feeling challenged. Does that help, Lisa? You've got to get to know them. You've got to get to know what makes them tick. You have to advocate for them, and they will work so hard for you if they're working within their area of strength. Advocate, 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 advocate. I don't think we can say it enough. All right. Thanks again for attending our webinar. We know that this is an hour of your precious time, and we really do appreciate you spending that hour with us today.